Okay, so we'll get started here. It's 12 o'clock. Hi, I'm Laura Zervos, and I'm a registered and licensed dietitian. And I'm here. I'm delighted to present the nutritional component for the Lending Hearts program. Today, our subject is food safety. And if you were with us for the last two segments, we talked about fruits and we talked about vegetables, and we did discuss safety to some degree there. But today, we're going to get into a little bit further. And the reason is we're doing this is our latest report about foodborne illness from a 2011 CDC report estimates that 1 in 6 people, or 48 million people, Americans get sick each year. 128,000 are hospitalized and 3,000 each year die from a foodborne illness. So it's very serious. And there's very simple ways to prevent it. The most simple way, I'm sure you're all aware, is hand washing. That can reduce alone probably half of the foodborne illness that we have. And that's because, just bacteria they're everywhere. And so we're going to talk today about how to reduce the bacteria in our home, how to serve food safely, how to keep it safe, and, hopefully keep everybody healthy and well. There's 15 known pathogens that probably cause 95% of all foodborne illness. And we're not going to cover each one of them. You don't need to memorize them, but we're going to learn if one of the methods that we're talking should address most of those different pathogens, and that should cover it. So by being safe, we're going to protect ourselves against all 15 of those and significantly reduce to them. People have different reactions to foodborne illness. Many people come in contact, many healthy adults come in contact with a food that may contain a pathogen. We may have no symptoms at all, and we could have very severe symptoms. It just depends on your immune system. And it also depends if you have a small stomach, if you're a child, if you're an elderly person, maybe you have another comorbidity that puts you at risk for developing some of these further complications that we could experience when we're exposed to a foodborne illness. But again, many people will have no symptoms, but there are symptoms that you may mistake for the flu. Often it goes undiagnosed. It's very difficult. We hear about the foodborne illnesses in restaurants. There's been some in some of our fast food restaurants. There's some that have had our restaurants completely go out of business. And it's very unfortunate. Or you'll hear about a recall at the grocery store that maybe a meat has been infected, or you may find that there was a recent one about romaine lettuce. And so we need to be aware of those and pay attention to those recalls. But the ones that happen in our own home, they often go undiagnosed, correct? Or if you go to a party, or if you go to just a local restaurant and you come home and you don't feel so great, it might not make the news. Nonetheless, you could still have a problem. And like I said, most adults could handle a little unhealthy bacteria. Those that can't, young small children, the elderly, and pregnant women, and again, anybody that may be immunocompromised. And bacteria need the right time and the right temperature to reproduce. And there's a couple things that need to be present, and the moisture and warmth, and some of them even need a little oxygen. And bacteria thrive on protein. That's why you often see it associated with meat products, shellfish, poultry, even our dairy products. They thrive on that protein. And with the right conditions, they could spread rapidly. And we're going to talk about the temperature danger zone a little bit later, and that is that area, that temperature range of 40 degrees and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, where you do not want to hold food. That is when bacteria can multiply exponentially. One bacterium can multiply to 1 trillion in a 24-hour period when it is in that temperature danger zone. So that's something to be aware of. We don't want to, you always hear keep hot foods hot and keep cold foods cold. That is the biggest way to prevent foodborne illness. And when does food safety begin? Of course, it begins where we buy our food. You want to buy from a reputable place. Most of our grocery stores here today are reputable. Most of them take into what they call the HACCP program, and that is the Hazardous Analysis of Critical critical control points. So they are watching that food from the time that it arrives at their store to the time that it leaves their door. And they analyze all those critical control points to make sure that food is not in the temperature danger zone. That when you buy under the meat counter, if you buy some kind of prepared food, they're making sure that if they are making a prepared fish or a prepared kebab, that while they took it out of the refrigerator, how long is it being prepared? How long does it take them to make several kebabs and then get them back under refrigeration? So all of those points are analyzed, and you'll have that in the larger stores and most of the mom and pop stores as well. Everybody is pretty aware right now of foodborne illness and the implications that it could have. So that's of utmost importance, because when you have an outbreak like that, it could damage your reputation and, like we said before, put you out of business perhaps. So you as a consumer, you want to make sure that you're buying your things from a reputable store. When you go to a farmer's market, you want to look around to see the person that's actually selling it. You want to look at their truck. Do they have a refrigerated truck? How long has this food been on the, how long has this food been traveling? And some foods, it's not going to matter so much, but then you have to be aware of the other foods that we were talking about, the protein foods that may be sitting in the sun in the course of a day at a farmer's market that could be really potentially dangerous, that are in the temperature danger zone. You want to look, do they have these products on ice? Do they have them refrigerated? Do they have several for display, some demonstration ones, and then they're getting them out of refrigerated truck to give to you? So those are some things to keep in mind. We mainly, like I said, we mainly have to watch for those at maybe a festival, food trucks, people that are selling, vendors that are selling stuff on a sidewalk, and also the farmer's market, like I had mentioned. The other thing to remember is when you do go to the grocery store, take advantage too of most of them now have wipes that you could wipe down your cart. They do have several sanitizing stations. If you're going to bring your own bags, the canvas bags, you want to make sure that you launder them often. I would recommend laundering those after every trip to the store because they're a great source of harboring bacteria. You could have some protein foods or chicken, fish, poultry seep out onto there and actually stay in that surface and recontaminate something else when it gets wet and get onto our fruit that we're not going to be processing and we may be eating raw. The first thing you want to do too is when you're buying something that you want to make sure that the package is intact. You don't want to see any tears on the packaging. You want to make sure that shrimp over here that we're going to be using, you want to make sure that this Ziploc was intact. Those kind of things that we need to watch out for. If it's not, that's going to be something that you don't want to purchase. The other thing that we want to look is inspect when we open. You're not going to open this until you get home, but when we're opening that pickle jar, do you hear the pop? If you don't hear those pop, you should probably discard it. I would recommend, if you don't hear the pop, that you would want to take it back to the store. Never try it. You don't want to taste it, especially when we get into our other products like low acid canned foods. You would never want to taste those. You would want to do that science experiment on yourself. That's something that you would want to address. As far as canned foods go, our canned foods, the can should be nice and soft and smooth. You would look out for on the seam here if you would see any bulges or any problems there. If you see any dented cans, a bulging can, sometimes you'll see this should be a little bit concave. If you see it that it's bulging at the top, that's something that you would want to avoid. Again, don't even take it into your home, don't buy it. Then you want to check the dates too. Most stores are very good about this, but you want to make sure that your date is good. Some products you will see, I just saw even recently some, they were chips, tortilla chips, and they were going to expire very shortly. I don't know if maybe they weren't rotated, but even those kind of things you want to check to make sure that the expiration date's good. Again, not necessarily a harmful product, but you may suffer quality in that product. These these cans too, when you get them home, you're going to want to make sure that in your pantry that you put the newest can in the back. If you have other cans of paste or you have the similar product when you're bringing things home, you want to make sure that you put the newest in the back so that when you take something, you take the very oldest one. That way you won't end up with cans that have expired. When you get home too, you want to make sure, your primary job when you get home is to reduce the incidence of foodborne illness. So we are going to want to wipe these cans with either a wipe that has a solution on it, an antibacterial wipe. You could also wipe it with some hot and soapy water so that when you do open the can, that you're not introducing bacteria from the outside. You went to the trouble to buy a safe food. You want to make sure that you're not injecting that food with harmful bacteria that may be present on the outside of this. And then the same goes for a can opener. After each use, you want to make sure that this is clean. You can throw most of them. You could throw into the dishwasher. If you have a kind that's fixed to your cabinet, something under your cabinet, a lot of people have those. You want to make sure that you wipe that off with a nice soapy rag, even an antibacterial wipe, one that's appropriate for those kind of things, for metal, and let it air dry. Excuse me, if you would like to dry it, you would want to dry it with paper towel to make sure that you're not introducing any bacteria from like a tea towel or a dish towel. So once we get home, our three primary things that we want to look for is we want to clean, and we want to separate, and we want to cook. The cleaning is, like I mentioned before, we are going to, cleaning involves removing the dirt, right? Removing the dirt off of this product, removing the dirt off of here, removing the dirt off of our hands. Sanitizing is removing microorganisms. So sanitizing can be done with disinfectant wipes, things like that for our equipment and our countertops. And we could get into more about that. Proper hand washing, like I said before, is probably the #1 way to reduce foodborne illness. And that's the reason is because many bacteria live on our body, and we may touch our face, we may touch our nose, mouth, eyes, and we have bacteria there. So you want to make sure too that whenever you go to prepare a meal, sometimes it's good to have a nail brush by your sink in your kitchen. Make sure that you scrub very clean, to scrub these very well, rather, to remove any dirt under the fingernails. You want to be careful if you have artificial fingernails or very long fingernails, because that bacteria can stay under there for a very long time. And if you're doing something where you're making a meatball or something without gloves, you're transmitting a lot of bacteria, or you could get bacteria under there even when you go to wash your hands. And then if you were to prepare some food next after that, that could be very hazardous. So we want to be careful about our hands. That's the #1 place to start. So you want to wash your hands before you start cooking. You want to do it during, and you want to do it in between things when you're multitasking. If you take a phone call with your cell phone, or you go to touch something else, a refrigerator handle, anything, your door, maybe you go to answer your door in the middle of cooking, you would always want to wash your hands again before beginning to prepare your food. So that's very important. The other thing is countertops. When we come home from the grocery store, we want to make sure that our area here that we're using, we don't want to set our purse or our shopping bags here. You might want to set them on the floor, unless you're going to wipe, give it the attention it deserves and wipe down when you're done. You could be bringing, you have all of that in the back of your car or in your trunk. You have it in even the bags that were in the grocery cart. They don't, those aren't sanitized. So the bag is there on the bottom of the grocery cart, and then it gets into the back of your car, and then you're bringing those things into your clean countertop. So you just want to be careful about that. The other thing I said, the purse, the keys, those kind of things where bacteria just thrive, you would want to make sure that you refrain from doing that. So, and if you do, we need to two-step process. The first one I would recommend is wiping down your counter with a clean dish towel. You want to make sure that you rotate those often. Get it warm and soapy. Wipe down, and then when you want to sanitize, I recommend taking a gallon of water with 1 tablespoon of liquid bleach, dissolving that in Then that makes a nice sanitizer for your cabinets, appliances, handles, anything that you need to sanitize. You could even do that with our cutting boards, and we'll get into cutting boards a little bit later. So that's very important. You never want to use a sponge. Sponge could harbor a lot of bacteria. If you do want to use a sponge, I recommend putting a moist sponge either into the dishwasher or into your microwave for 1 minute on the high setting, and let it sit in there for a little bit. When it's done too, it could get very hot and you could hurt yourself when you're removing that. So just go ahead and let it cool off in the microwave, and then it'll be fresh for the next time that you want to use it. That might be something you do after you get done doing your morning dishes. You could always pop that in the microwave, and it's late, leave it in there, and when you come home, it's clean, it's ready to go, it's cooled off. And we talked about that. You want to change the towel often, and you may even want to use a separate towel for when you're cleaning dishes and when you're drying dishes rather, and that one that you're going to wipe your countertop with, the one that you're going to wipe your hands with. And you want to, whenever we do go to wash our hands all these times, we really want to make sure that we're doing them for 20 seconds or more. Warm water, friction, and you may want to sing a song. Some people sing the alphabet because we know that takes more than 20 seconds to do that. Some people sing the happy birthday song. Any of those will work, just as long as you get under there. And again, you want to dry with a nice dry cloth. If you do not have one or you're not sure about that, paper towels are the best way to go, because we know that there's no bacteria on those, because you get a fresh one every time. The next thing I want to talk about were, we talked about cleaning the tops of cans, and then we also want to clean our sink. And mine is right here next to us. We want to make sure that we clean the entire basin, the sides, the lip. If there's any kind of lip underneath there, you want to make sure that you get that good and clean. Even taking out the strainer and cleaning underneath the strainer. Clean off the actual faucet itself and faucet handles. Faucet handles are a very big source of bacteria, because we have the bacteria in our hands, right? And we go to turn our handles, we go to turn on the water, and we introduce the bacteria there, and we may not get back to there to wipe them off again. So you want to make sure that should be a constant wiping down area with either some type of antibacterial solution, like we had mentioned, the Clorox, or the bleach rather, and water solution, an antibacterial wipe. Any of those will suffice. Hot soapy water gets rid of a lot too. Rinse it with some clean water so it's good to go. It's a good practice to do those after every time, that you prepare a meal and you're cleaning up. It's good practice to wipe down that sink, wipe down those handles, and that way it's ready, fresh for you when you go to prepare your next meal. When we have something on our appliances, we want to make sure we clean that right away. The microwave oven, you want to make sure, if yours has a turntable, that you actually take it out of the microwave and you could wash it in some nice hot soapy water. Some of them are dishwasher safe. And you also want to wipe down the inside of your microwave really well, plus the handle and the buttons. All of that need to be wiped on a regular basis to reduce bacteria on those surfaces. And the other thing that you want to remember too is when you're wiping down the microwave, to make sure that it gets dry and you aren't using anything toxic in there as well. So you want to be careful about what you use to clean that. Hot soapy water is fine, and then it will be, and then dry it with a nice dry cloth. That is probably the best way. Some of our other things, we have our blender, some of those things can be put into a dishwasher. If they can't, you could always wash them with some hot soapy water. And the other thing, toasters, you want to make sure that you wipe down those too. And coffee makers, you want to make sure that, if your carafe is dishwasher safe, that's a good idea to throw it in there, the pot. Even the part that actually holds the coffee, that's a good place to do it. You always want to be wiping down those handles, because they're a good source of harboring bacteria. And, when you get a spill on your stove even, wipe it up immediately, just to deter any accidental growth. And, the big thing too is, about separating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our cutting boards and what you need to look for in a cutting board. So you want to look for a nice hard surface. We don't want anything to be porous. And you have to keep an eye on your cutting boards. You may need to replace them every once in a while. If they become pitted, or you set something hot on them where you may have burned them and there is a groove in it, could definitely harbor bacteria. And this one, it's wore off right now, but there were some little ridges in here when I first purchased this. And I always had to pay extra attention to make sure that I was getting that bacteria out of there and washing it very thoroughly. You want to immerse it in hot soapy water, wash it really well. And then I have ones that I like to use for fruits and vegetables and my produce. And then for meat and poultry and fish, I like to use this one. And you don't have to have them color coded. You could use whatever you like. It's just, I know that the yellow one that I'm using for my protein foods. But you could have different sizes. You could even put take a permanent marker and put some, put a little P on there for protein or anything that you need to do to know that one is for meat and one is for vegetables. Because no matter, how well you clean these, you could miss some bacteria, and cross-contamination is, something that really needs a lot of attention, because you have a food like an apple or your watermelon that has no bacteria, that doesn't really, one known for harboring bacteria, and you could get cross-contamination from either using the same knife or the same cutting board that wasn't cleaned properly. And if it had some bacteria on one, like a groove here, it could transfer itself to there. And that, fruit and some of our vegetables are consumed raw, right? So they may very well be in that temperature danger zone. We're not going to heat them up to above 140 to kill any of those pathogens. So that's very important to remember. The other thing that we want to remember is our knives too. And we're not just concerned with this part of our knife. The handle is an excellent source for harboring bacteria. So you want to make sure you pay enough attention to your handle. You also want to look for, when you're purchasing a knife, one that is one piece, okay? So you'll see sometimes there is a blade actually inserted into the handle, and that you'll see a seam here, and that could be a source of bacteria. If you do have one of those, you want to make sure that you pay extra attention when you're cleaning it to make sure that you get everything out of that crease, because we could be cutting something, and if you can, have two knives. Maybe one is for your fruit, one is for your meat. So you're not mixing them in between. If you only have one knife, you just want to make sure that it gets cleaned every time. Hot soapy water. These also can be rinsed in a liquid bleach and water solution as well, just dipped in there for at least 10 seconds to remove any other bacteria. And then what you want to do then after the same can be done with our cutting boards. Like I said, you want to immerse them, hot soapy water, and you could also soak them in that liquid solution of water with liquid bleach. And you would want to put it in there. And then this part is very, very important. So we killed all those bacteria that were present, all those microorganisms. Now we don't want to introduce it with a dirty towel, or the best way is to air dry these, okay? So you want to put them on a rack where the water can drain off and they air dry. The other thing that you could do is, if you needed it right away, you could use a paper towel. A lot of times you'll see in commercial kitchens, cooks will put a dish towel under their cutting board to make sure that the cutting board doesn't move on a slippery surface. So that is a great trick, to put a wet towel underneath it to keep it from moving when you're cutting. You would just want to make sure that you're using a freshly laundered towel or cloth. You wouldn't want to use one that came out of the dish room, or one that you just use to wipe your counter off, because you're just putting it right here, right next to your food that you have. So separate. That was the second step. You want to separate. You don't want to cross-contaminate. However you want to mark those for yourself will be helpful. And let's see. You want to, even while you're preparing this, you want to make sure that you're keeping your raw foods away from your foods like your fresh produce, carrots, celery, things that might not be getting cooked, apples, melons, because they could cross-contaminate, and those foods might not be taken to through the temperature that they need to be to kill any harmful bacteria. Let's see. If you're preparing a large meal and you know that you're making a salad and some vegetable side dishes, you may want to do those things first, because as good as you clean, maybe you could miss something. So I would get out the cutting board and the knife that I use for the produce. I have my clean countertop here, prepare everything, And then you move on to the protein foods that can be hazardous, like chicken and beef and fish. And the thing that you want to remember there too is now we recommend that you do not rinse those foods before you start preparing them. It used to be, people would wash the chicken when they got home, or the pork chop, or even fish. But what you're doing is really possibly spreading more bacteria, because what happens, we get under our sink here, the water starts splashing everywhere. It could be splashing onto our countertops, it could be splashing onto food that it's be splashing onto our produce that we're not going to cook. It could be splashing onto our equipment that we plan to use. Maybe it splashes onto our can opener or our knives or anything that we have already sanitized and we think is clean. So it's very important that you don't do that. That they're saying now that if there's any kind of pathogen on there, washing it's not going to do anything anyhow. But the heat that used in cooking will, once we take it out of the temperature danger zone, will kill any of those pathogens. So that's important to remember. And that brings us to our next subject, is thawing foods. So we want to, this is our frozen shrimp again that we're using. And you would want to make sure that you follow the thawing instructions, and it'll tell you, this is something that you don't want to take out of the freezer and sit onto the counter. The same with our ground beef here. It's not advisable to do that, because what's happening is we have that bacteria and we're going through the temperature danger zone. Most homes are somewhere in the 70-degree range, room temperature, maybe 72, 74, as high as 76. Even higher, depends how you keep your home, but that range is in that 40 to 140. So I don't think many of us keep our homes below 40 degrees or above 140 degrees. So we would be in the temperature danger zone, and that is a time of rapid exponential bacteria growth and microorganism growth. And that's when things get a little bit dangerous. So that is something. You want to make sure if this ground beef, if it's about an inch thick, this is probably going to take a good 24 hours to defrost. So the best thing to do is, if we know we're making that meatloaf tomorrow, tonight, or today, like 24 hours ahead of time, we want to stick that in the into the refrigerator, out of the freezer and into the refrigerator. That way it'll be nice to work with you. Sometimes we forget to do these things, and people think they'll take a shortcut and set it in a room that's a little bit cooler, or maybe in a sink. But the best way, even if you have a microwave setting too, some microwave have settings where they could defrost. Those work very well too, but the best way is under refrigeration. So you may want to make yourself a schedule. A good way to do it is when you're cooking tonight's dinner, think ahead of what's tomorrow and take it out right then and stick it in the refrigerator for yourself. A large roast could take somewhere between 4 to 7 hours per pound. Steak like this could take maybe 12 to 14 hours. These things in the microwave, you would want to take it out of this foam container. And I have a package of chicken here. You would want to take it out of this plastic container and put it into a microwavable safe dish. And how do we know if it's microwavable safe? If you put it into the microwave for 1 minute and you're able to touch the container, it's microwave safe. If it burns your fingers, if it's very, very hot to the touch, that's something that we do not want to microwave our food in, because the things could be leached out of that, whatever that material is. So that's not advisable. And then we have Thanksgiving coming up, so it's important to talk about the turkey. The recommendation is 1 day for every 5 pounds. So a 15-pound turkey could take up to 3 days to defrost. And that's where some people get into a little bit of trouble. They think you could take it out the day before, but you could feel it if you do that. If you take it out on a Wednesday for Thursday, you'll see that not much has happened in that time. So, and that's where people think, oh, well, maybe I'll just set it out on the countertop and it could defrost. It could do the rest of the job here, but that's really not advisable to do. We always want you to defrost under refrigeration. So try to set yourself a reminder that, okay, I bought a 20-pound turkey. That means 4 days ahead of time, I better, take that out, put it under refrigeration. That'll be nice for you to work. Fuss, you'll be able to pull out the giblets, and everything should be good. The other thing that we want to make sure when we're cooking, speaking of our turkey and our other roasts and meats, is that we check those. How do we check if they're done? We always want to use a thermometer. And the important thing to remember about, there's different kinds. There's thermometers that you could leave in the meat while it's cooking in your oven. There's those heat resistant ones. They're digital, they're dial, and some of them you cannot leave in the oven. This one is plastic on the edge, so it would not be able to stay in the oven. And the thing about this is whenever you use them, you want to make sure it's clean. So we use hot soapy water for this, and I also keep some alcohol wipes on hand, and you just take one off like this. This is important, and I always have these if I'm grilling for a large event or something. And I have a lot of things on the grill. After every time that I check something for the temperature, I will wipe it off with an alcohol wipe to remove any pathogens off of there, microorganisms, because we don't want to, if we put something in, if we check the temperature and something is, we're waiting for our chicken and you put it in and it's 125, you wouldn't want to take this out. There's two things that could happen. You wouldn't want to take this out and then later check our chicken and think, oh, okay, well, it's 160 now, it's time to come out. But now we're just introducing that bacteria that was on that chicken and we're putting it back into the chicken. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to take the thermometer that has our chicken on it that was undercooked and maybe put it into beef or something else, or like, check, a casserole at that point. So you want to make sure that you wipe it off of after every use. And then most of them, after you wipe it with that alcohol wipe, and the beauty of the alcohol wipe is it's going to dry very quickly. So after it's dry, you always want to store them, and they usually come in a nice little case. Store them in there so they stay safe and calibrated. You may need to calibrate it from time to time, and that could be done because that's important too. If we don't have this calibrated, how can we trust it to tell us that we have the right temperature for our food? So you would want to either stick it in some ice water or I usually use boiling water and make sure that that temperature is at the boiling point, and then you're calibrated. And most of them come with directions on how to calibrate them should they become out of calibration. So that's something you always want to make sure. This is one of your essential tools in the kitchen. It's probably one of your best friends. So it will never steer you wrong. And I encourage you to do this for everything, whether it's your hamburgers or outside. Sometimes it could look done, but it might not be 160. And we really need to make sure that that center of the hamburger is 160. When we go to measure a roast chicken, what we do is we want to go, you would want to go, I usually go into several places. I'll take it right into that, the part where the breast is, take it all the way down till you hit the bone, and then lift out about about a half inch to 1 inch. So you make sure that you're not getting bone. You make sure that you're not getting gristle. All those things could throw off your correct temperature. Take it all the way to the bone, pull out a little bit, and that should be the most accurate reading that you're going to get right there. And when you do take it out, if it did reach the desired doneness that was recommended, you'd want to take it out, cover that at that time, and it is going to do some carryover cooking, but we don't want to count on carryover cooking to get to temperature. It should get to temperature in the oven. And what I mean by carryover cooking is it may get, after you take it out and you cover it with foil, it is going to climb a few more degrees just sitting there through conduction. So don't count on that conduction to finish it. You want to finish your foods in the oven, on the grill, wherever you're cooking them. Beef, I mentioned, that should come to an internal temperature of approximately 160, especially for ground beef. Chicken is also going to be 160. Pork and lamb, probably around 150. And some of our fish is going to be around 145. So it's important to know those numbers. And, there's many charts with those. And it's, to get the desired doneness you want, to not overcook, but to cook thoroughly is very important. Let me see. Also, I wanted to discuss about that. Casseroles, very important. You want to bring those up to 180. And another area that we have problems where people may want to reheat a leftover, but you really need to make sure that when we reheat them, that we reheat them thoroughly. When you put something into the microwave, if we're putting a casserole in there that we made, maybe it's some type of chicken casserole, you want to put it in there halfway through and give it a stir, because sometimes the middle doesn't get hot enough. We want to do that a few times, make sure you're covered. And then by covering our food too, we're not putting that maybe the undercooked food onto the walls of the microwave, introducing pathogens there. So we always cover it. and then give it a stir, check the middle temperature, check in a few places. And again, in between times you would want to wipe off and sanitize this, or even hot soapy water would be fine. And make sure that you do get up to an internal temperature of 180 degrees. Then you know that you're safe. Leftovers are very, I think they're probably, with foodborne illness, they're right up there with eating raw meat. You know, it could really cause a lot of problems. So we always want to make sure. That's why that whole Thanksgiving period is so, that's why it's so dangerous, you know, as far as foodborne illness goes, because you have people maybe not correctly defrosting their turkey. You have people, you know, stuffing that turkey so densely, when really we just want to put it maybe with our stuffing or dressing, whatever you call it, maybe outside the turkey or very loosely inside that cavity. You don't want to pack it because it's not going to get cooked in there. Then you have, you know, if you have giblets or anything that's inside that stuffing, it's dangerous, it's hazardous. It's going to be next to, you're going to see it next to your cooked food, your cooked chicken that you, or your cooked turkey that you thought was okay, but we're introducing another pathogen into that. And then we have the reheating of the leftovers if they're not reheated properly. There's so many opportunities for foodborne illness during that holiday. So it's just something to be aware of. You don't want to have that holiday go bad because of some foodborne illness. Okay, so we talked about microwaving. Let's talk about grilling, because grilling can be very hazardous as well. And that is different. You want to clean your grill between each use. You want to remove any charred foods. You always want to make sure that you grill on both sides. You know, even if it's something delicate like fish, you may want to use a basket so you can get that other side turned over and heated through. Sometimes people hesitate to do that because it's so delicate and it may want to come apart. So I recommend using a basket that has been washed, you know, for that. You know, always use your thermometer, and you want to, grilling is very, that can be dangerous as well. You want to cook till it's well done, but you don't want to cook till it's charred. We don't want those chemicals that when the grease drips down, hits the element and then comes back up. And that's when that gets dangerous. And that happens a lot with charred food. Consume too much charred food, and we want to make sure that our food is cooked, but not to that point. And that is the big thing there. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was packing lunches. And now that we're in the back to school season, a lot of, and maybe now too, some schools may not be offering food service. So we are doing more with packing lunches. And I'm going to show you one of my containers here. Very often I will put a soup or a stew in my child's lunch, because there's nothing like a warm milk lunch when you're at school all day, especially when in the middle of winter, or as you know, just sometimes a warm meal makes all the difference. So what I would recommend is, before you put your food in here, I would put some very hot water, boiling if you can, if you have the time in the morning. And you want to leave it in here for a couple of minutes while you're getting everything else ready for your lunch. And you're going to heat this thermos up really, really well with that boiling water. And then you're going to dump it out, and then you're going to put your hot food in here, whether it is a soup or a stew, whatever it is. And then we're going to close it. And this is an excellent way to make sure that that hot food stays hot. And my daughter's even told me, even at the end of the day, sometimes she's opened it and it's just as hot as it was when I put it in there. So eventually it will get cold, but it's an excellent way to keep those hot foods hot during the school day. And you know, when you come home, again, you want to make sure that you wash everything, that this gives a chance to air dry so we don't introduce any pathogens. And we want to, these are not able to go into a dishwasher, but you can clean it with some nice hot soapy water and air dry it, and it's ready for the next use. But these are fantastic for packing lunches. The other thing that we want to do is you know, keep our perishable foods in those containers, you know, and then if you find that you weren't able to consume all this, that you filled it up with too much stew or chili, you would want to discard that at the end of the day, because at that point, once you had it open and you were eating, I'm sure that this would get to that room temperature state at the bottom. And then it doesn't have the benefit of having that hot water in there to preheat this. So you would find that this food would be in the temperature danger zone. So it's not a good idea. You'd want to tell your children that you could eat it at lunch, but when you get home from school, it has to be discarded. I wouldn't recommend eating it at that point. So it's probably not safe at that point. It's not worth taking the chance. The other thing that you want to do is if you have a lunch bag that you bring from home, you would want to, a cloth bag, you would want to make sure that you launder that often as well. And we always want to make sure that we're using a proper lunch bag, either a paper bag or another lunch bag. You don't want to put things in backpacks where books are sitting on desks or floors or a number of places there. I just can't even imagine all the bacteria that's in a gym bag or a book bag. So that would be something you would want to avoid. Use the right tool for the right reason. So that would be using a paper bag or a cloth bag for those. Couple of other things when we're talking about these leftovers that we may be using in our lunch, it's important that we always label them. So we put something in, we label it, we date it. There's no guessing. So you know, I labeled this the 18th. It's now the 23rd. So I know, you know, no more than a week in the refrigerator for some things. Most things could last. I have a new refrigerator, so a week usually is fine. But you don't want to taste test these things. You don't want to try to see if you see visible mold. After so many days, you just want to discard it. You wouldn't want to take a chance on getting ill, you know, maybe eating some mold, because you can see some mold, you can see some you can't. Some it might not have bloomed yet. So it could be present in here. You don't want to find out the hard way and taste it and become ill. You would want to just go by your date. Another thing too, when we are, you know, maybe we're going to put some things in the freezer to save for another date. You always want to label them with the date and the year. And we know that sometimes that our green beans and things like this, they could last up for maybe a year or two in our freezer. So we want to make sure that we always have the dates on here and label what it is. Sometimes things look different. You might put some chicken or pork chops in the freezer. Maybe you don't label them because you're like, oh, I'll recognize that. And you pull it out, you're like, I can't tell if this is chicken thighs, chicken breast, pork tenderloin. So you always want to make sure that you write on there what it is and the date that you put it away. And after a certain period of time, you want to get rid of it. And the thing is, when we freeze things like pork or chicken, you may be able to eat past that year that it's been in there, and you may see some freezer burn. That food is not going to make you sick necessarily. It's not necessarily pathogenic, especially if you cook it properly, but it will decrease in quality. It might not taste the same. It's not going to get you sick. It didn't produce pathogens, but it's not the same quality it was, and the taste might be off a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see. So we want to make sure that we do take a lunch bag, and I just have a few more things here. Our canned goods, you want to make sure that you always label them and date them. And you know, if you have a well-meaning friend that provides you with some canned goods from the year, you want to make sure that after you we take off the band, and we want to make sure the seal is sealed. And whenever we use our can opener to take off this lid, you should hear a nice pop. If you see anything, this is canned goods it can be a source if they were improperly processed of botulism. So and it wouldn't take very much to get you sick or even be fatal. So if you open this and you don't hear the pop, and you see that it's a little bit cloudy or murky, or that there's some bubbles in it, or it's like a little bit foamy, do not taste it. It's bad. It's not worth the risk to do that. Give it a visual inspection. Like I said, even sniffing something with botulism is not a good idea. So if you don't hear that pop and you do see some evidence of food poisoning, definitely discard safely and stay healthy. So that's very important. Some common mistakes that people make are thawing foods on the countertop. And again, we would want to do that. Just in review, that is one of the things that causes the harmful bacteria that it multiplies at a rapid rate. Or cooling leftovers on the countertop before putting in the fridge. So like you're sitting there at dinner time and you finish, and maybe you leave those things out on the countertop. Maybe somebody's coming later that you want to hold their dinner. You're best off making a plate for that person, covering it, and stick it in the refrigerator right away. And they could always reheat that. You want to make sure that things aren't sitting out on the counter and rapidly developing some microorganisms in there that can potentially be harmful. Tasting food to see if it's good. A visual inspection, go by our dates. Those are all good to know. That would be the most important thing to do. We don't want to take a chance on doing that. Forgetting to wash your hands. When you come home from the store, every time you come home, really it's a good idea to wash your hands, wash under your fingernails really well so they're not harboring any bacteria there and you're introducing any to in your food, especially before you eat. That's another thing, or before you prepare any food, you would want to make sure that your hands are clean. The other thing that people often do is they don't change out their dish towels or their sponges. That's very, very important, big source of bacteria there. Another thing that introduces foodborne illness can introduce foodborne illness into our home, and something many people do, or maybe eating raw or undercooked foods. When I think of raw, I think of cookie dough. And I just heard of an incident in my community where somebody was eating. Now this girl, she was slight, she was very small, and it didn't take much, right? So maybe a healthy person could have ate that, but somebody smaller definitely had a reaction. She was in the hospital for a few days. Very scary, salmonella poisoning. So that's just something, from the raw egg. So we want to make sure that we avoid that. If we do want to have, a Caesar salad, and we want to use that egg, we should use a pasteurized egg, pasteurized cheese. When we have unpasteurized things like some of the soft, unripened cheeses, even some lunch meats, some of those things could harbor some listeria. So that could be dangerous for some of our population. Let's see, eating raw cookie dough, undercooking the high-risk foods, and that is like we talked about, the chicken or the inside of beef. Even some, eating some seafood raw is very dangerous. So you would want to take precautions there. Putting cooked or foods back, when you refrigerate them, you want to make sure that you don't want to put raw foods on top of cooked foods in your refrigerator when you're stacking them, because maybe the raw foods, you could have some drip down onto a cooked food that people really aren't, or onto fruit or something like that, where you might just be rinsing it off. You're not going to get rid of the bacteria that way. Foods that aren't going to be cooked, or a salad or something like that, you'd want to be very careful. The other thing, another common mistake that I see people make is marinating foods at room temperature, and that can be very dangerous. You always want to marinate under refrigeration. Just because food is in an acid, there's no chemical out there that is going to kill the harmful pathogens. I've heard some old wives' tales that maybe hot sauce or some acids can kill bacteria, but really the heat is what we need. So leaving on our counter is not going to do the trick with some of those things. Another place where people get into problem are stirring some food that while we're cooking on the stove, and then using that tasting spoon and then reintroducing it back in the pot. That could be very dangerous as well. So you want to avoid doing those things. And some we're talking about sanitizing our can opener. There's other things too that our food comes in contact. Our scale could also be wiped down with soapy water and wiped with an antibacterial wipe. Sometimes it's best to maybe put a plate on here first and tear it, and once we tear it, then then that plate could be washed. Or if it was, plastic wrap, whatever we're doing on here. But this, you don't want to cross-contaminate things that we were weighing or measuring. Another place when we were talking about our tools and equipment is our where we store our knives here. And I do like these. I think these are great because they keep our knives sharp. When you put the knives in the drawer, that tends to dull them. But you want to make sure that after you clean your knife, hopefully you have a rack that you could air dry them, but you want to make sure there's absolutely no moisture on here. That way, We're not introducing any bacteria into here. You don't want to have any, you don't want to make sure that there's any food debris on here. And then you're going to put it back in where it stays nice and safe and clean. And the same with all of the tools in here. And this is a good way to store things, but from time to time, you know, if you see anything in here, you may want to, it's very difficult to wash these and get all the liquid out. So you just want to make sure that you're constantly putting clean, dry utensils into here. And if you do get any food in there, it may be time to switch out your knife block. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, you know, was hygiene too. If you're not feeling well, maybe it's a good day to have somebody else to take care of the cooking, some personal hygiene things. Remember, we talked about hands, but don't forget, nail polish is toxic. So if we were to happen to chip a piece of our nail polish and it would go into the food, that can be toxic. Of course, we want to watch our hair. You'll notice if I'm in the kitchen, I always have my hair pulled up, and I have an apron on too. Apron is something that you're going to want to launder frequently, because that could also harbor bacteria. When I'm cooking, I'm sure some of that is splashing up on me. And then if I were to go to do, you'll see, if you were to see me here preparing a large meal, I have 2 aprons sometimes because I'll go back. We do a large lamb sometimes, and I'm touching that, and I could be getting pathogens on me, some bacteria on me. And then I may go to making a vegetable dish that is, or a salad. And so you'll see that I will completely take that off, put another apron on that is safe. So you don't want to cross-contaminate. You always have to be thinking, what are the potential ways that I could be cross-contaminating food? You know, taking something that really potentially was not dangerous and making it dangerous. You know, the other, you know, people think of some of the common offenders are, you know, mayonnaise and egg products, you know, outside, or chicken salad, those kind of things during picnics. Potato salad can be hazardous, right? So we want to make sure they've come out with many products now, like insulated bowls, where you stick that bowl into the freezer and it stays cold for 8 hours. So that's fine, but we want to make sure you're best off to putting a small layer of the potato salad or whatever kind of salad that you have out there, so it could all stay cold. You wouldn't want to put the whole recipe in there, because what's going to happen, the stuff that's on top is not going to stay cold. The stuff inside may not stay cold. So you want to have a small layer of the food in there so we can keep it cold, and then you could replenish. And I would probably rinse that out with some soapy water and wash it with some soapy water, and then rinse out, and then you could add some more to it. Or put it on ice, whatever way that you find convenient for you. But that's one thing that you would always want to make sure of, that we're keeping those cold food colds. And picnics, you know, picnics are a very challenging time for that. You don't want to have something sitting out in the sun in that temperature danger zone, just like we talked about farmers markets, potentially, you know, some dangerous foods out there. And the low acid foods like hummus that you know, that have a higher pH. So you would want to be very careful. Sometimes they're, you know, you'll go places and they're sitting in the sun, or different dips. I would caution you against trying those. You want to make sure that if you do purchase those things, that they do come out of a cooler and that you get them refrigerated right away, which you know, also brings us to summertime. And if you know that you are not going straight home from the store, that perhaps you take a cooler with some ice packs, especially if you know that you have bought some meat or some dairy products, that you refrigerate them until you get home, and then you properly refrigerate them, because sitting in your car, we know how hot the inside of our car can get. You would want to make sure that you not only keep your car cold, but you have to keep those foods cold as well. So I recommend taking a cooler with you that has an ice pack in it for those things. And that'll help too. You may want to put some frozen foods next to that as well to keep everything cold. So that is pretty much our discussion today on food safety. You know, the next in the series coming up is going to be, I'm going to cover some of these things first. Next, we're going to move into some cooking things. So I look forward to doing that with you. We're going to move into some soups and some holiday meals, what are going to be a lot of fun. And I'm excited to do that. So it's good to cover safety first, and now we could move on. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.